Sherlock Holmes and the Haunting of Blackthorn Manor. Original story produced by Cafe Tales. Chapter 1. The Call to Blackthorn. It was a brisk autumn evening when my friend Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves seated before a roaring fire in our quarters at 2-1B Baker Street. The lamplight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that seemed almost alive. Holmes, ever the restless spirit, had been unusually subdued that day, his violin untouched in its case, and his pipe sitting cold on the mantel. "You seem troubled, Holmes," I ventured. Breaking the silence, he glanced at me with a faint smile, his sharp eyes betraying the turmoil beneath. "Not troubled, Watson. Intrigued. A curious missive arrived this morning, and I have been turning its implications over in my mind." From the pocket of his dressing gown, he produced a yellowed sheet of paper, its edges frayed as if it had been handled too often. I leaned closer, catching sight of an elegant but hurried script. "Mr. Holmes, I beg for your assistance. Shadows move where no light casts them, and whispers haunt me in the still of the night. I fear I am losing my sanity. Come to Blackthorn Manor with all haste. Your servant, Lady Eleanor Havisham." I read the words aloud, savoring the peculiar urgency they conveyed. Shadows and whispers. Surely this is the work of an overtaxed imagination. Holmes tapped the letter thoughtfully against his fingers. "Perhaps, Watson, but Blackthorn Manor is reputed to be one of the most haunted estates in all of Sussex. Lady Havisham is a respected member of society, not prone to flights of fancy. I believe this warrants investigation." His tone was decisive, and I knew better than to argue. Holmes's keen intellect rarely erred when he sensed a case of interest. Within the hour, we were bundled into a carriage, the fog-drenched streets of London giving way to the desolate countryside. The journey was a somber one, the moon veiled by heavy clouds, and the only sound the steady clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Holmes remained silent for most of the journey, his mind clearly at work. As for myself, I could not shake a growing sense of unease, heightened by the dreary landscape and the weight of Lady Havisham's plea. Holmes broke the silence abruptly. "Watson, have you noticed how the letter's tone differs from Lady Havisham's reputation?" "I assumed it was written in a moment of extreme distress," I replied. "Distress, indeed. Yet there is an unusual blend of urgency and in her words, it hints at someone who is not merely frightened, but genuinely astute. Such a combination intrigues me." As the countryside sprawled into misty plains, I found my thoughts drifting to Blackthorn Manor. It was a name that stirred vague memories, tales of ancestral feuds, tragedy, and, of course, ghostly sightings that served as the gossip of Sussex's quieter hamlets. I recalled snippets of conversation in the London papers, eerie shadow scene moving across the manor's high windows, servants fleeing in the dead of night, and strange deaths that the locals dared only whisper about. Now, the legend seemed all too real. We arrived at Blackthorn Manor shortly before midnight. The mansion loomed before us like a dark monolith, its turrets piercing the night sky. The house seemed to repel the moonlight, its windows like empty eyes staring out into the void. As we approached the grand iron gates, the clattering of the carriage slowed, and I felt the weight of the manor's oppressive presence settle upon me. The driver, a taciturn man, who had not spoken a word since we left London, suddenly stopped short of the gates. "Begging your pardon, sir," he muttered, "but I'll go no further." Holmes arched an eyebrow. "Superstition, or something more personal?" The driver hesitated. "I've heard the stories. Strange lights, a banshee's wail at midnight. I've no wish to tempt fate." Holmes handed him a generous tip, and we alighted, the night air biting as we stepped onto the overgrown gravel path leading to the manor. The gates creaked open under their own weight, a sound that set my nerves on edge, and we proceeded in silence. The butler who greeted us was a frail, pale man whose trembling hands betrayed his unease. "Lady Havisham awaits you in the drawing room," he said, his voice thin as parchment. He led us through a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, the faint glow of candelabras barely cutting through the gloom. The air inside the manor was heavy, almost oppressive, and the faint scent of mildew clung to every surface. Along the way, I noticed faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls, their gazes seeming to follow us as we passed. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, stopping before one particularly large portrait of a man with cold, piercing eyes. "This must be Alistair Havisham, the founder of the estate. Do you see, Watson, how his expression commands authority even now?" I nodded. though I could not shake the unsettling feeling that the painted eyes were watching us. When we entered the drawing room, Lady Eleanor Havisham rose to greet us. She was a woman of striking beauty, though her face was drawn with worry. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, but there was a weariness about her posture that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming so swiftly. I fear I am at the end of my wits." Holmes inclined his head. "Lady Havisham, we are at your service. Please, tell us everything." She gestured for us to sit and began her tale. "It began 3 nights ago," she said. "At first it was only faint whispers in the dead of night, as if someone was speaking just beyond the edge of hearing. Then the shadows began to move, twisting and writhing like living things. Last night I awoke to find her voice broke, and she shuddered, to find a shadow at the foot of my bed. It had form, Mr. Holmes, grotesque, human-like shape with no discernible features. It reached for me." "And these occurrences," Holmes said, leaning forward, "are they confined to your room?" "No," she replied. "The servants have seen them too, and one maid has fled the house entirely. Other parts of the house, the library, the cellar, are said to harbor even darker presences." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "We shall require full access to the manor, Lady Havisham. Watson and I will investigate tonight." Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. The clock struck 11 as Holmes and I took up our positions for the night's vigil. The drawing room, though richly adorned with tapestries and dark oak paneling, had taken on an ominous air. The fire in the hearth had been allowed to burn low, and the flickering light of our single lantern cast distorted shadows upon the walls. I could not help but feel as if the very house were watching us, waiting for some unspeakable event to unfold. Holmes sat in his characteristic stillness, his sharp eyes fixed on the far corner of the room where Lady Havisham had claimed to witness the shadow's movements. I, for my part, clutched my revolver tightly, my nerves taut with anticipation. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the faint sigh of the wind against the windows. "Holmes," I whispered, "have you any theory as to the nature of these apparitions?" He gave a faint smile, though his gaze did not waver. "Every phenomenon, Watson, no matter how extraordinary, has its origin in natural causes. Our task is to determine what those causes might be. But I confess, the peculiar details of this case have me quite intrigued. Shadows that defy the laws of light, whispers without a source. These are not mere parlor tricks." As he spoke, a chill seemed to descend upon the room. The air grew heavy, and I felt an inexplicable pressure around my chest. At first, I thought it might be my imagination. Then I saw Holmes's hand tighten around the arm of his chair. "Do you feel that, Watson?" he asked, his voice low but steady. I nodded, unable to suppress a shiver. "It's as if the very air has turned against us." Before Holmes could reply, a faint sound reached our ears. It was soft at first, barely more, then a murmur, but it grew steadily louder. It was the sound of whispers, indistinct and overlapping, as if a dozen unseen mouths were speaking at once. The sound seemed to emanate from every corner of the room, wrapping itself around us like a suffocating fog. Holmes rose to his feet, his movements deliberate and controlled. He held the lantern aloft, its feeble light illuminating little more than the immediate surroundings. "Do you hear it, Watson?" "I do," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But where is it coming from?" Holmes took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. The whispers continued, rising and falling like the tide, their tone neither malevolent nor benign but deeply unsettling. Suddenly, the lantern flickered on for a brief moment. The room was plunged into darkness, but when the light returned, I gasped aloud. A shadow darker than the surrounding gloom had appeared on the far wall. It was indistinct at first, a mere smudge against the paneling, but as we watched, it began to take shape. Limbs extended unnaturally, and its head, an amorphous mass, seemed to shift and pulsate, as if alive. "Holmes," I said, my voice trembling, "what is that?" "A question we must answer," he replied, his tone calm despite the tension in the air. "Remain here, Watson. I must observe it more closely." I wanted to protest, but the resolve in his voice left no room for argument. I watched as he approached the shadow, his movements cautious but unflinching. The shadow did not retreat or advance, but seemed to ripple, as if aware of his presence. Holmes stopped a mere foot away from the apparition and extended the lantern. toward it. The light should have dispelled the darkness, but instead, it seemed to absorb the glow, growing darker and more defined. Holmes reached into his pocket and withdrew a small vial of powder, which he scattered into the air. The shadow recoiled slightly, its edges blurring, but it did not disappear. Fascinating, Holmes murmured. It reacts to salt, an entity bound by some material constraint. Then, perhaps before he could finish his thought, the shadow surged forward, its amorphous limbs reaching out. Holmes leaped back, narrowly avoiding contact, and the lantern's light wavered dangerously. I raised my revolver instinctively. "No, Watson," Holmes shouted. "We must not antagonize it further." The shadow paused, as if heeding his words, and then began to retreat, shrinking back into the corner from which it had emerged. The whispers faded with it, leaving the room in an oppressive silence. Holmes exhaled slowly, his sharp gaze never leaving the spot where the shadow had vanished. "Well, Watson," he said at last, "it seems we have a most unusual adversary. But this encounter has provided us with invaluable clues." "Clues?" I asked, still shaken. "Indeed. The reaction to salt, the absorption of light, the manifestation of sound, these are not the characteristics of a mere illusion. There is a purpose behind these phenomena, Watson, and we must uncover it." As he spoke, the door to the drawing room creaked open and Lady Havisham appeared, her face pale and drawn. "Did you see it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "That shadow, we did," Holmes replied, "and we intend to discover its origin. But tell me, Lady Havisham, has anything like this ever occurred before?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the darkened corner of the room. "Not in my time, but there are stories. My great-grandfather, Alistair Havisham, was said to have dabbled in things best left untouched. Some claim he summoned spirits to guard the estate, though I always dismissed it as nonsense. But now," she trailed off, her hands trembling. Holmes's expression hardened. "Then we must investigate further. Tell me, Lady Havisham, where are your great-grandfather's personal effects? Journals, letters, anything that might shed light on these events?" "They're in the attic," she said, "but no one has dared to go up there in years. The servants say it's cursed." Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "Cursed or not, Watson and I shall see it for ourselves. Come, Watson, the night is far from over." As we ascended the narrow staircase to the attic, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease deepened. The faint scent of mildew and dust filled my nostrils, and the wooden steps groaned beneath our weight. Holmes carried the lantern, its light casting eerie shadows on the slanted walls. When we reached the attic door, Holmes paused and turned to me. "Be ready, Watson. Whatever lies beyond this door may hold the key to our mystery." I nodded, gripping my revolver tightly, and Holmes pushed the door open. The attic was vast and cluttered, filled with forgotten relics of the Havisham family, trunks, faded portraits, and cobweb-covered furniture. But what drew our attention immediately was a large, ornate chest in the center of the room. Holmes approached it cautiously, his keen eyes scanning every detail. The chest was carved with strange symbols that seemed to writhe in the lantern's light. "Interesting," he murmured. "These markings are not decorative. They are sigils, Watson, likely of occult significance." He knelt and examined the lock, which appeared to have been recently tampered with. Producing a set of tools from his coat, he began to work on it within moments. The lock clicked open. As he lifted the lid, a wave of cold air swept through the attic, extinguishing the lantern. In the darkness, I heard Holmes's voice, calm but urgent. "Stay close, Watson. The game is afoot." Chapter 3. The Secrets of the Manor. The faint morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor as Holmes and I descended from the attic. The events of the previous night lingered in my mind like an unsettling dream. The shadowy figure, the cursed chest, and the cold that seemed almost alive had left me grappling with questions that seemed beyond even Holmes's deductions. Holmes, however, was as resolute as ever. He carried the contents of the chest, a bundle of tattered letters, a leather-bound journal, and a peculiar obsidian amulet with a determined expression. "These artifacts are key to unraveling the mystery, Watson," he declared as we entered the drawing room, where Lady Havisham waited, pale and anxious. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. Holmes laid the items on the table, his eyes sharp with concentration. "Much, Lady Havisham. Your great-grandfather's dealings with the arcane appear to have left a lasting impression on this house. This journal, in particular, may provide valuable insight." But first tell me, do you recognize this? He held up the obsidian amulet, its surface smooth, yet strangely cold to the touch. Lady Havisham gasped, recoiling slightly. That belonged to Alistair. He was never without it. My mother once told me it was a talisman, though she would say no more. Holmes turned the amulet over in his hands, his expression inscrutable. A talisman indeed, but for summoning, I wonder. He placed it carefully on the table and opened the journal, its brittle pages crackling as he turned them. The journal revealed a chilling narrative. Alistair Havisham had been a man consumed by a thirst for power. His entries spoke of secret rituals, bargains with unseen forces, and an obsession with preserving his legacy. One passage stood out among the rest. November 12, 1823. The shadow has taken form. It obeys my commands, though it hungers for something I cannot provide. Perhaps the whispers are warnings, or perhaps they are promises. Either way, the pact is sealed. Blackthorn will endure even, if it must be shrouded in darkness. I shuddered as Holmes read the words aloud. Holmes, I asked, do you mean to suggest that this entity is the product of Alistair's experiments? Precisely, Watson. It appears Alistair sought to bind this shadow to the manor as a guardian of sorts, though the nature of the pact remains unclear. What is evident is that the shadow's presence has persisted long after his death. Lady Havisham buried her face in her hands. Then it is true. My family's legacy is cursed. How can we rid ourselves of this abomination? Holmes's gaze softened slightly. Fear not, Lady Havisham. Every chain can be broken if one understands its links. But first, we must locate the nexus of the shadow's power. Tell me, is there a place in this house that Alistair frequented above all others? A study, a chapel perhaps? Lady Havisham hesitated. There is the east wing. It has been sealed for decades. The servants refuse to enter, claiming it is unclean. Holmes's eyes gleamed with purpose. Then that is where we shall go. The east wing was a stark contrast to the rest of the manor. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the air was thick with neglect. The hallway leading to Alice's study was lined with portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to follow us as we passed. I could not suppress a shiver as we reached the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. Holmes examined the door carefully, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. These symbols, he murmured, are similar to those on the chest. Alistair must have used this room as the focal point for his experiments. He produced a set of tools and began to pick the lock. After a few moments there was a soft clicking. The door creaked open. The study beyond was a tableau of decay. Shelves of mouldering books lined the walls, and a massive desk stood at the center, its surface cluttered with papers, candles, and strange instruments whose purpose I could not fathom. Holmes moved quickly, his keen eyes scanning the room for anything of significance. He stopped before a large circular diagram etched into the floor, its lines filled with what appeared to be dried blood. "This is a summoning circle," he said, his voice tinged with fascination. "Alistair must have used this to anchor the shadow to the manor. But look here, Watson, these lines have been disturbed." I stepped closer and saw that parts of the circle had been scratched away, as if someone had attempted to disrupt its integrity. "Could that be why the shadow is no longer bound?" I asked. Holmes nodded. "Indeed, someone, perhaps one of Alistair's descendants, has tampered with this circle. But whether their intent was to banish the shadow or to release it entirely, I cannot yet say." As he spoke, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lantern. The air grew colder, and the oppressive presence we had felt the night before returned with a vengeance. I fumbled for my revolver as the whispers began, anew louder and more insistent. "Holmes," I called, my voice barely audible over the cacophony. "It's here." The shadow materialized in the center of the room, its amorphous form writhing and pulsating as if struggling to maintain coherence. Holmes remained calm, his silhouette barely visible in the darkness. "Hold your ground, Watson. This is its domain, but we have the means to fight it." I felt a sudden surge of icy fear as the shadow began to advance, its limbs stretching toward us. Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew the obsidian amulet, holding it aloft. The shadow hesitated, its form wavering as if repelled by the artifact. "It fears the amulet," Holmes observed. "This must be the key to breaking its hold." With deliberate precision, he stepped toward the summoning circle and placed the amulet at its center. The reaction was immediate. The shadow recoiled violently, its whispers rising to a deafening pitch. The circle began to glow faintly, its lines pulsing with an otherworldly light. "Watson, quickly the salt from the attic," Holmes called. I retrieved the pouch from my pocket and scattered its contents along the disrupted lines of the circle. As the last grain fell, the glow intensified and the shadow let out a guttural roar that shook the very walls of the study. Its form began to dissipate, unraveling like smoke caught in a gale. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The whispers ceased, and the air grew still. Holmes straightened, his face pale but triumphant. "The shadow's tether has been severed," he said, "but our work is not yet done. We must ensure that no trace of Alistair's experiments remains to plague this house again." Lady Havisham appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and awe. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now," Holmes replied. "But the secrets of Blackthorn Manor run deep and there may yet be more to uncover." Chapter 4. The Rising Terror. The hour was late, and the shadows within Blackthorn Manor seemed to stretch and twist as though alive, stirred by the faint flicker of the fire in the hearth. Holmes stood by the mantelpiece, his eyes fixed on the dying embers, as though they held the key to the mystery that had gripped this house. Lady Havisham had retired for the night, her nerves shattered by the events of the past weekend. The silence that enveloped the manor was as oppressive as it was ominous. "Watson," Holmes began, his tone clipped but deliberate, "our unseen adversary is no novice. Every element of what we have encountered, the shadows, the whispers, the drafts, has been crafted with a singular goal: to unsettle and terrify Lady Havisham into abandoning her home." "And to what end?" I asked, though the conclusion was dawning. "On me, could this be a ploy to claim the estate?" Holmes nodded, his expression grim. "Precisely, Watson. Blackthorn Manor is a valuable property and Lady Havisham's departure would leave it vulnerable to manipulation. The architect of this scheme is methodically at the execution, betrays an over-reliance on theatrics, a critical weakness we can exploit." A sudden muffled sound broke the stillness, a faint scraping, as though something heavy was being dragged across the floor above. Holmes's gaze sharpened, and he motioned for silence. The sound ceased abruptly, replaced by the groan of a floorboard. "The attic," Holmes said, his voice low. "Let us see who dares disturb this house at this hour." The attic was accessible only by a narrow staircase at the far end of the east wing. The chill in the air grew more pronounced as we ascended, and I could not shake the sensation of being watched. Holmes, lantern in hand, moved with deliberate silence, his every step calculated to avoid the creaking boards. At the top of the stairs, the door stood slightly ajar, and the faint glow of a candle spilled into the corridor. Holmes pushed the door open with the tip of his cane, revealing a scene of calculated chaos. The contents of Alistair Havisham's chess papers, books, and strange artifacts were scattered across the floor. Yet, amidst the disarray, one object stood out: a series of mirrors, mounted on adjustable frames, positioned around the room with precise alignment. Holmes stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the setup. "Ingenious," he murmured. "These mirrors are part of a device designed to create the illusion of movement. A small light source would reflect off these surfaces, producing shadows that appear to writhe and shift." I bent closer to inspect the mechanism, and the whispers we heard. Holmes pointed to a concealed compartment beneath the chest, which housed a small gramophone, a pre-recorded track, triggered by a mechanism. "The timing, Watson, is the key. Whoever orchestrated this charade has an intimate knowledge of Lady Havisham's movements and fears." "And who could possess such knowledge?" I asked. Holmes straightened, his expression thoughtful. "Someone close to her, someone who stands to gain the most from her absence." Before he could elaborate, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the lantern, plunging the attic into darkness. A faint scuffling sound echoed from the far corner of the room. Holmes relit the lantern with practiced speed, illuminating the space once more. But the corner was empty, save for a pile of dusty crates. "We are not alone," he said quietly. "Whoever was here has fled." We spent the next hour examining the attic in meticulous detail. Holmes discovered additional wires and pulleys, all connected to the mirrors and gramophone. Phosphorescent paint had been applied to several objects, creating a faint, eerie glow that would be visible even in near-darkness. It was a masterful deception, one designed to terrify even the most rational observer. "The ingenuity of this setup is remarkable," Holmes said as he adjusted one of the mirrors. "Yet it is ultimately flawed. The perpetrator's reliance on mechanical devices leaves a trail one we can follow to its source. I nodded, though a sense of unease lingered. Holmes, do you truly believe Lady Havisham's life is in danger, or is this merely an elaborate ruse? Holmes's expression darkened. Fear, Watson, is a powerful tool. Whether our adversary intends harm or merely seeks to manipulate, the effect on Lady Havisham is the same. We must act swiftly to expose them, before further damage is done. Back in the drawing room, Holmes laid out the items we had collected from the attic: the mirrors, the gramophone, and a spool of wire. He examined each piece with meticulous care, his mind racing ahead to the next step. Watson, he said, we have enough evidence to confront our adversary, but the key to their identity lies not in these devices, but in their motive. Tomorrow, we shall question Lady Havisham's household. Someone within these walls harbors a secret, and it is our task to unearth it. And tonight, I asked, my exhaustion evident. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Tonight, we lay a trap. Whoever orchestrated this charade will return to assess their handiwork, or to destroy the evidence. When they do, we shall be waiting. Under Holmes's direction, we prepared the study for our nocturnal vigil. The mirrors and wires were left intact, but Holmes added his own modifications, ensuring that any movement in the room would trigger a signal. The gramophone was rewound, and the faint glow of the phosphorescent paint was carefully enhanced, to draw the intruder's attention. As the clock struck midnight, we took our positions concealed behind the heavy drapes. The manor was silent, save for the faint creaks and groans of its ancient timbers. My heart raced as we waited, the tension mounting with each passing moment. At last, a shadow moved across the threshold. The door creaked open and a figure slipped inside, their movements deliberate and precise. Holmes sprang from his hiding place, his voice cutting through the darkness. Stop where you are. The game is over. The intruder froze, and, as Holmes lit the lantern, their identity was revealed. It was Lady Havisham herself. Chapter 5. The mastermind revealed. Lady Havisham stood frozen in the pale glow of Holmes's lantern, her expression one of shock and defiance. Her hand rested on the doorframe, and her lips quivered, though whether from fear or anger, I could not tell. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Surely, there must be an explanation for her presence here at such a late hour. Holmes stepped forward, his sharp gaze never leaving her. Lady Havisham, he began, his voice calm yet commanding. The time for pretense is over. You have orchestrated this entire spectacle, have you not? She blinked, taken aback, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then her shoulders sagged, and she seemed to age before our eyes. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, it was me, but why? I interjected, unable to contain my astonishment. Why go to such lengths to frighten yourself and your own household? Lady Havisham turned her gaze to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I had no choice, she said. I needed to make it seem as though the manor was cursed, as though it were uninhabitable. Holmes tilted his head, his expression one of detached curiosity. And what purpose would that serve, Lady Havisham? To whom were you sending such a message? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. To the creditors, she admitted. To those who would take this house from me and sell it to the highest bidder. Blackthorn Manor has been in my family for generations, but my husband's debts have made it impossible for me to keep it, I thought. If they believed the house was haunted, they would abandon their efforts to claim it. I stared at her, stunned. You risked your own safety and peace of mind to maintain this ruse. Surely there must have been another way. There was no other way, she replied, her voice breaking. Do you think I wanted to do this, to live in fear of my own creation? But the debts are overwhelming, and I could not bear the thought of losing Blackthorn. Holmes regarded her for a long moment, then turned his attention to the artifacts we had collected from the attic. The devices you used were ingenious, I must admit, he said. Mirrors, to create the illusion of moving shadows, a gramophone to produce whispers, and phosphorescent paint to enhance the effect. But such elaborate measures suggest assistance. You did not set all this up alone. Who helped you? Lady Havisham's gaze fell to the floor. My late husband's solicitor, Mr. Carter, she confessed. He has been a loyal friend to my family and agreed to help me devise the plan. It was he who procured the equipment and arranged for the attic to be prepared. Holmes nodded, as though this confirmed his suspicions. And the noises tonight, the shadow we saw, was that also part of your doing? Lady Havisham shook her head vehemently. "No, I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, I have not been to the attic in weeks. I came to the study tonight only to retrieve some papers I had hidden here, nothing more." Holmes's expression darkened. "Then it would seem your ruse has taken on a life of its own. Someone else has discovered your devices and is using them to further their own agenda. But who?" I asked, my mind racing. "Who would have the opportunity and the knowledge to manipulate the situation?" Holmes's gaze flicked toward the doorway. "That, Watson, is what we must uncover. Lady Havisham, I suggest you retire to your chambers. Dr. Watson and I will handle matters from here." She hesitated, then nodded, her face pale as she turned and left the room. Once she was gone, Holmes strode to the desk and began examining the documents scattered there. "Watson," he said, "it is clear now that Lady Havisham's scheme, while misguided, was not malicious. But someone has seized upon her deception and is using it to their advantage." "But who?" I pressed. "And for what purpose?" Holmes held up a ledger, his sharp eyes scanning its contents. "This ledger contains a list of debts owed to various parties. Among them, one name appears repeatedly, Edmund Havisham." "Her cousin?" I asked, recalling the name from earlier conversations. "Indeed," Holmes replied, "a man with motive and opportunity. He stands to gain significantly if Lady Havisham is forced to relinquish the manor." The following morning, Holmes and I paid a visit to Edmund Havisham's estate, a modest yet well-maintained property on the outskirts of the village. Edmund greeted us with a mixture of surprise and weariness, his sharp features betraying a certain cunning. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, gesturing us inside. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Holmes wasted no time. "We have uncovered evidence that links you to the disturbances at Blackthorn Manor. The devices used to simulate the haunting were procured through your accounts, and your presence in the attic last night did not go unnoticed." Edmund's expression faltered, but he quickly recovered. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he said. "I have not set foot in Blackthorn Manor in months." Holmes smiled thinly. "A convenient alibi, but one that does not hold. The gramophone recordings include phrases spoken in your voice. Mr. Havisham, shall I play them for you?" Edmund paled, his confidence crumbling. "Very well," he said, sinking into a chair. "I admit it. I discovered my cousin's plan and decided to use it to my advantage. If the house appeared cursed beyond redemption, I knew she would be forced to leave, and I could acquire it for a fraction of its worth." "A bold scheme," Holmes said, "but one that has now failed. Lady Havisham's position is secure. Involvement will be reported to the authorities." Edmund's face twisted with anger. "You think you've won, Holmes. The debts will still consume her. Blackthorn Manor is doomed, whether by my hand or another's." Holmes regarded him coolly. "The truth, Mr. Havisham, is that your greed has been your undoing. Blackthorn Manor will endure, as will Lady Havisham's legacy." By the time we returned to Blackthorn Manor, the air seemed lighter, as though the oppressive weight of the past week had lifted. Lady Havisham met us in the drawing room, her relief evident as Holmes recounted the events of the morning. "And so," he concluded, "the hauntings were nothing more than a calculated scheme, first by yourself, and then by your cousin. While your actions were misguided, Lady Havisham, they were born of desperation rather than malice." She nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. You have saved my home and my sanity." Holmes inclined his head. "The credit belongs to the truth, Lady Havisham. It has a way of dispelling even the darkest shadows." As we departed, I turned to Holmes. "Another case solved, then. But tell me, Holmes, do you ever tire of unmasking human folly?" He smiled faintly. "Never, for in every deception lies the opportunity to restore order, and that, my dear friend, is the true reward." And with that, we left Blackthorn Manor behind, its secrets laid to rest at last. This was Sherlock Holmes and the Haunting of Blackthorn Manor, an original story produced by Cafe Tales.